Good evening, everybody. I feel like I'm reading in church because I am reading in church. My name is John Northup. I am a graduate of the University of Virginia and actually a parishioner here at Christ Church Episcopal. So I'd like to welcome everybody here to beautiful Christ Church Episcopal. And would like to just say a few words. We're excited here. We've got Will Hitchcock and Liz Varon here that are going to have a fantastic program for everybody. We are thrilled on behalf of the UVA Club of Savannah. We're thrilled to partner, as we always are, with the Georgia Historical Society. And we can't wait to hear everything that Stan is going to lead us through. And so with that, I'd like to welcome everybody here again. And I'd like to introduce Todd Gross, who is the president and CEO of the Georgia Historical Society, to introduce the speakers. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome both to those of you who are here in person and those who are joining us by live stream. As you heard, I'm Todd Gross. I have the honor and the pleasure of serving as the president of the Georgia Historical Society. I want to thank John Northup. I want to thank the UVA Club of Savannah. We are incredibly grateful for this wonderful educational partnership that has brought so many distinguished scholars to Georgia. I'm also delighted to be back here in Christ Church in this beautiful sanctuary, a historic sanctuary. We're delighted to be here. Thank you for letting us come back. I am also a parishioner, a communicant in this church, and this is the first time I've been back since we had a program here at the Georgia Historical Society, and the comment is, of course, he's a typical Episcopalian. But I'm glad to be here tonight myself. Tonight's program, a United States but a divided America, how we have celebrated the nation's birthday during turbulent times, is part of the Georgia Historical Society's Georgia History Festival and the Georgia Historical Society's US 250 commemoration. We are grateful to the sponsors and supporters of the Georgia History Festival who made possible tonight's program and all of our educational programming and events and teacher resources across the state. You will find a full list of our corporate partners and sponsors in your program, but I want to single out just a few, including the Coca-Cola Company, which sponsored tonight's program, and the Georgia History Festival lead sponsors, Southern Company, the Home Depot Foundation, Hyundai, Chick-fil-A, Delta Airlines, Georgia Power, and Gulfstream. Thanks as well to our friends at the Book Lady Bookstore who have for sale a selection of our speakers' books. After the program, there will be a book signing, so please be sure to get a copy of everything that the Book Lady has in her inventory. It is an honor to welcome to Savannah and to the Georgia Historical Society Dr. William Hitchcock and Dr. Elizabeth Varon of the University of Virginia. William Hitchcock is a New York Times best-selling author and award-winning teacher. He has written numerous books relating to World War II, including The Bitter Road to Freedom, A New History of the Liberation of Europe, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and a winner of the George Louis Beer Prize from the American Historical Association. He has been a Fulbright Scholar, a fellow of the Nobel Institute in Oslo, the holder of the Henry Kissinger Chair at the Library of Congress, the Berlin Prize Fellow at the American Academy in Berlin. He is currently James Madison Professor of History at the University of Virginia. Elizabeth Varon is, give him a round of applause, all right. Elizabeth Varon is Langborn M. Williams Professor of American History at the University of Virginia and a member of the Executive Council of UVA's John L. Nau III Center for Civil War History. She is the author of 6 books, including Armies of Deliverance, A New History of the Civil War, which won the 2020 Gilder Lehrman Lincoln Prize. Her most recent book, Longstreet, The Confederate General Who Defied the South, published by Simon & Schuster in 2023, won the inaugural American Battlefield Trust Prize and the Los Angeles Times Biography Prize. One interesting fact that you may not know about our panelists tonight is that they are married to each other. I think this is the first time that we have had a husband and wife duo for a Georgia Historical Society program, so if they start arguing with each other tonight, we'll understand what's going on, right? Among the other honors garnered by Dr. Varon for her groundbreaking biography of James Longstreet is the Georgia Historical Society's Malcolm and Muriel Barrow Bell Award for the best book in Georgia history. The Bell Award, established in 1992, is the highest publication award given by the Georgia Historical Society. It recognizes the best book on Georgia history published in the previous year. In this case, that year was 2024. Yes, I said 2024. We have tried unsuccessfully on 2 previous occasions to present this award to her, including last January when it snowed. So this is the 3rd attempt. I even said when I saw her, I'm not going to believe it's going to happen until I've actually put this in your hands. We're still not there yet. This is the 3rd attempt to get this in her hands, and I am delighted we are finally recognizing her publicly for her remarkable scholarship and writing. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct honor to present the Bell Award for the best book in Georgia history for the year 2024 to Dr. Elizabeth Varon. Congratulations, Liz. Yeah, we did it. Yes. All right. Thank you. Okay. I told her I would take that back so she wouldn't have to lug it around, and we would erase it and put the next person's name on there. Congratulations, Liz. I'm thrilled we finally did this. The moderator for tonight's program is Georgia Historical Society senior historian and the Elaine B. Andrews Distinguished Historian of the Georgia Historical Society, Dr. Stan Deaton. And now, without further ado, please welcome William Hitchcock, Elizabeth Varon, and Stan Deaton.
Thank you, Todd, Dr. Varon, Dr. Hitchcock, Liz, Will, welcome. Delighted to be here with you. So the setup, of course, is we are rapidly approaching the 250th anniversary of the United States on July 4th of this year. There have been several milestones like this in our history, of course, beginning in 1826 with the Jubilee. We won't go back quite that far, but we are going to talk about some key moments and the ways in which our leaders throughout our history have sort of drawn on that founding moment. So Liz, let's start with you, because chronologically we're going to begin in 1876, kind of set the table for us. Ulysses S. Grant was president. Of course, we know that he was an election year. He's ending his 2nd term, but what else was going on in our country at that time as we approached and then celebrated our 100th anniversary?
Well, thank you for the great question, and thank you for the award. I'm so grateful. The Georgia Historical Society is a national treasure, as is this city, and I couldn't be more pleased by this honor. I'm going to rewind a little farther than you have asked me to here. We should pause to think a little bit about the 250th, the centennial back then in 1876. What were they celebrating exactly? Well, Declaration of Independence, and let's pause for a moment to remember what that remarkable document did. I'll make an argument today that it's inspired Americans, but they've also disagreed about its meaning. And to understand why and how, we have to remind ourselves of the many layers of meaning of that document. So that Declaration of Independence, of course, articulates this principle of human equality. All men are created equal. One of the most important ideas in the modern world, and an inspiration to people around the world. That document back in 1776 had to explain the causes of the break with England. So it has a long list of grievances focused on the king. It's an anti-authoritarian document. That document had to find a way to bind together colonies that were very disparate in their social structures and in their politics. It had to find a way to break an emotional bond that the colonists had with England, a deep emotional bond. And I'm here essentially paraphrasing a great historian named Pauline Maier, who's written about this. It had to articulate a vision of the future so compelling that men would be willing to give their lives for it. And you have statues around the city of martyrs to the revolution, reminder that they didn't know how all this was going to turn out. They didn't know if they were going to be hung for treason or, if this was going to succeed. So it's a multifaceted document, declares human equality, but also the right to revolution. And from the start, Americans have debated its meaning. And I'll give you just a few examples before we fast forward back to 1876. Even in the early days of the Republic, when we had Federalists and Jeffersonian Republicans pitted against each other back in the early 1800s, those two political parties typically held separate 4th of July celebrations because they disagreed with each other so much, and each side wanted to use that holiday as an occasion to run down the politics and the policies of the other side. Right out of the gate, we see some of these differences. We can observe as a second example that those who were marginalized in American politics, lacked voting rights, lacked political rights, took inspiration from the document, but often felt that they had to find alternatives to July 4th to celebrate. So we see abolitionists, for example, celebrating other important markers, the end of the slave trade or Britain's abolition of slavery. We see some African Americans in the North celebrate July 5th rather than July 4th, less chance of clashing with groups of whites who are celebrating, of social tensions, but also a protest to say we're excluded from the rights proclaimed in that document. And of course, Frederick Douglass gives a very famous speech, July 5th, 1852, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, in which he pays tribute to the ideals, the ideal of equality, but also points up the gap between reality and the promise of the document as he condemns slavery, the fugitive slave law, and so on. And then one more quick example before we get to your question. As we have the road to Civil War, we see secessionists and Confederates very ambivalent about July 4th. They celebrate the right to revolution part of the Declaration, but not the proclamation of human equality. And during the Civil War itself, particularly after the fall of Vicksburg on July 4th, Confederates essentially repudiate July 4th as a holiday, and they won't start celebrating it, white Southern Democrats, again until into the 1870s when they've defeated Reconstruction and essentially reestablished control over the region. So, it's always been a subject of debate. Now, 1876, so the centennial of the United States, a time of deep division and profound worry about democracy and the health and future of democracy. What's going on? You've alluded to some of it. The country is pulling out of a very profound economic depression. There's all sorts of class tension, labor strife, strikes, and so on. There is a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, inequality that we will associate with the Gilded Age. We're on the brink of the Gilded Age. We have corruption scandals in the Grant administration. Some of his cabinet members taking kickbacks and raiding the public coffers and so on. We have an election campaign underway. It will pit Rutherford B. Hayes against Samuel Tilden. It's a referendum on Reconstruction. And Reconstruction itself, of course, is in its demise during this period. It is undermined by the terroristic violence of white supremacists in the South, the groups like the Klan, who suppress black voting, stuff ballot boxes, attack in a grim example of this, the Hamburg Massacre of 1876, attack African Americans who are trying to celebrate the 4th of July. This campaign of violence and propaganda and fraud destroys Reconstruction at a time when the Northern public itself is less and less willing to support that experiment. So this is this swirling backdrop to this centennial. Now, the centennial itself will take place 1876 in Philadelphia. Should I tell folks a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
So this is a fascinating moment. The American public really focused on Philadelphia as the epicenter of these centennial celebrations. Fairmount Park, many of you, I imagine, have been there, familiar with this territory. Fairmount Park is the site of a sort of centennial fair. Some 200 structures are built. Some 10 million people will visit Philadelphia to participate in this centennial. This is nearly a fifth of the entire population of the country. The themes of the centennial: progress and reunion between the North and South. One of the slogans of the centennial was no South, no North, no East, no West, one union, indivisible. Again, I've just described the backdrop. So the centennial itself, this fairgrounds at Philadelphia with its 200 some buildings, features examples of American ingenuity. We have the telephone, we have the typewriter, electric light, internal combustion engine. We have, I think, the arm of the Statue of Liberty, which is still being built, is there. Plenty to celebrate and to dramatize American progress. But the centennial celebration also reflects these divisions that I've just alluded to. We have sectional tensions. White Southerners, particularly white Southern Democrats who have been battling Reconstruction, are very ambivalent about this Philadelphia centennial. They don't trust the Northern sponsors of it. They feel that they will not be well represented. They're critical of displays at the centennial that seem to celebrate the Union's victory in the war. A painting of Gettysburg, for example, became controversial. Very touchy about any references to emancipation. And there are debates among white Southerners about whether to participate in the centennial. There's some who say, hey, this is a great opportunity to show the promise of the South and to encourage investment in the region. I think Arkansas and Mississippi are the only states that have state-sponsored sort of displays at the centennial, but many other white Southerners essentially boycott it because they see it as a sort of Yankee event at which they're not welcome. We have African Americans eager to participate, but largely kept out of the construction crews that built the site, of the displays and exhibits. A few examples: an African American painter named Edward Bannister wins the award for best painting, but when the Centennial's organizers realize he's African American, they try to withhold the medal from him, and the other artists have to rally around him so he can claim his own medal. African Americans try to have a bust to the great African Methodist Episcopal Church preacher Richard Allen erected at the Centennial. They run into all sorts of logistical problems. It doesn't happen until the very end. And then briefly, and I'll wrap up here with my long answer, women suffragists wanted a seat at the table at this centennial exhibition as well, and they requested permission to present their own sort of declaration of women's rights as part of their long campaign to gain the vote. And they're turned away, so they essentially barge into, if you will, a celebration, a reading of the Declaration of Independence. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony read their Women's Declaration of Independence, which takes aim at the tyranny, the aristocracy of sex, the tyranny of man over woman. So all of these fault lines in American society are very much on display, even as progress and unity are the official message.
So it sounds like the divisions were just as deep.
Just as deep.
Just as deep. Will, let's move forward a little bit. We're going to go through 2 world wars. The Cold War begins after the Second World War. Of course, the 1960s and all that they bring, Vietnam, which of course is part of the Cold War, the social movements of the 1960s, Watergate, and now suddenly here's 1976, and it's time to celebrate 200 years. Many of the people in this room lived through that.
Careful now.
Yeah, I know. Not naming any names. But we've talked about this. The 3 of us, of course, did and have vivid memories of it. Tell us, though, put it in the context of, was it any less divided than we are now. We tend to always look back and go, if we could just recapture that. Well, let's recapture 1976, and what do we find?
Well, I can't do it as well as Liz did about 1876. That was a tour de force, and that's what breakfast is like. I'm like, I just want to know where the keys are, honey. No, she's brilliant, and I love listening to her. Well, Stan prompted us to sort of think through, the context around these important events, and I'm sure many of you, like me, remember 1976 and the bicentennial. I was a kid. I remember going to the 4th of July on the Washington Mall with my dad. But as a historian, I knew nothing about the divisions in the world at that time. I was very little, but I as a historian, boy. I'm not sure if it's comforting or if it's depressing to think that there have been times in our history when we really have been divided. And the decade running up to the 1976 bicentennial was one of them. Let me just start you off of this picture with one phrase that will come immediately to your mind when you think about this period. Our long national nightmare is over. Wow. Imagine a president saying that about the resignation of his successor. Of course, that was Gerald Ford in 1974. But what we don't often remember is that Ford went on to say in that same passage, our Constitution works. Our republic is a rule of laws and not of men. And that was an amazing way of saying, as bad as it is, the Constitution held. The country held. We've just gone through this terrible period of Watergate and Nixon's resignation, but the system worked. So there was a note of optimism that he was trying to withdraw from this very, very difficult time. Now, what was the long national nightmare he was talking about? What must have felt like a very, very long period of time, the whole Watergate process, but take it back just a little further. Let's do the decade before that moment. 1965 is when the first really significant numbers of young men are sent by Lyndon Johnson to begin fighting in Vietnam. And eventually there'll be 500,000 Americans fighting in Vietnam, running up to the early 70s. This begins a period in which you can just run right through that decade and just it's a hall of horrors in many respects. I jotted a couple of down because I couldn't. They all kept coming out. I'm like, oh yeah, we got to add that in there. The beginning of the student movement, the student anti-war movement, picks up in 1966, but of course is going to gain momentum throughout the decade. In 1967, one of the most vivid pictures of that era is the students protesting in front of the Pentagon, and that's where you get them putting flowers in the muzzles of the rifles of the guard. 1968, of course, that terrible year that I'm sure many here remember, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and of Robert Kennedy within 100 days of each other. Two of the most important and charismatic and compelling individuals of the 20th century gunned down within 3 months. That same year, the riots at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, in which Daley's police are pummeling anti-war protesters and students with their nightsticks, all on national TV. The occupation of the buildings at Columbia in New York City, another something that was also played out on TV, which is something that your guys didn't have happening, but in the 60s and 70s they did. 1968, the Tet Offensive in Vietnam shows that the Vietnamese can strike at the Americans anywhere they want, and although it's a tactical loss for the Viet Cong, it's a sign that the war is not going well and it will take many, many more years. And that is when the popular opinion turns against the war. 1969, Woodstock, which is a symbol of a generational divide between young and old. Woodstock puts on display a hippie culture and a youth culture that's very lively and vivid. We all love the music of this period. But it also was a shock to many Americans to see this culture and this music that they didn't know and that they weren't sure about. This is also the period of both the women and the gay rights movement starting to really take hold and gaining momentum and becoming a social movement across the country, another sign in many respects of generational fracture. And then I needn't remind you that May 1970, there's some University of Virginia graduates here, but I'm sure others of you at your universities, if you were at a university at that time, which was a long time ago, but that's the Kent State shootings, in which the National Guard gunned down 4 young anti-war protesters on their own college campus in 1970. That will then trigger college occupations and protests all across the country, including very famously at the University of Virginia. Now, if you can get the UVA students in 1970 to protest, wow, that's something, because it was a very straight-laced kind of university. But that was a real a turning point in many respects for many young people. The Pentagon Papers were then published in 1971. So again, interesting echoes about suddenly the government secrets are getting revealed. Well, the Pentagon Papers showed that American military leaders knew that the war was probably lost before it even began. That very few leaders in the military and in the political arena had real confidence that they could win. And this is now being leaked illegally to the public. So another blow. Roe v. Wade, 1973. Now, this is a signature moment in women's rights, but also in the changing mores legal culture of the United States. And then I'll just throw in the global crisis. 1973, there's a war in the Middle East. You get the oil shock, you get the price hikes, you get stagflation, you get long lines at the pump, and then the pumps are empty when you get there. And in the middle of this, Richard Nixon resigns. Wow. This is a country that no longer knows itself. It feels at the time like the country's falling apart. And the figure that you would naturally look to for leadership and coherence and unity and so forth is politically mortally wounded and has to resign. So old Gerald Ford, a decent man, comes in under the most difficult of circumstances, and his job is to celebrate America. What you got? And it's going to be difficult. We can talk about why, but I just wanted to paint that picture to remind you, but also in a way to remind me of what I didn't appreciate as a kid, of just what the headwinds must have been like for certainly my parents and their friends and their colleagues, but really the country was in a really difficult, low time on the eve of the bicentennial.
So let's dive into the heart of this, and maybe the most difficult part to talk about is we keep it about history, but it's about the leadership during these tumultuous times. You just touched on it, Will, that people look to the president, the leader, or leaders, Congress, for leadership as these events unfold, as students are shot, and you go through that decade. What kind of leadership, how does leadership respond? Which leads us to the bigger question, and I'll throw this out there for you both to grapple with. How have our leaders in other perilous times in American history, not necessarily these two, how have they pulled from that founding moment to reassure Americans or not reassure them?
Well, I'll take that first, Liz, or unless you want to go first. Okay. Thank you. This is great. We don't do many panels together. This is wonderful. So this is a great question on leadership because, of course, 76. It's Ford is a caretaker president. Yeah, he's running for re-election, but it seems unlikely he's going to get elected. We're missing a leader, and that is why the 1976 bicentennial, in many respects, is as fractured as the country. Not in a bad way. Turns out the 1976 bicentennial was really very successful. But it was successful in a different way from what Liz has described. 1876, we have a site. We're going to have a World's Fair kind of atmosphere. People are going to go there and look at the artifacts. The bicentennial of 1976 was purposefully decentralized. So every state had its own commission. Every state did its own thing. And there was a bicentennial, American Revolution Bicentennial Commission and administration, yes, in Washington. But many participants in the federal government and in the nonprofit world and in the state and local governments participated in ways that they were not invited to do at any previous time. So the 1976 bicentennial, against all the terrible things that I've just said about that difficult time, turned out to be remarkably successful, especially because in the area of public history, the investment of state and local communities in their own history. huge funds from the top flowed down into the states so that people could do things like oral history, documentary filmmaking, archival preservation, historical marker renovations, things that where we meet history, where the public meets history. A lot of emphasis was placed on that. So a lot of funds actually flowed into the history makers, the people who do the hard work of gathering the material and translating it so the public can gain access to it. The 1976 bicentennial had a really significant impact on the way we did and thought about the public history and the public arena without having a clear national figure who was identified with it, which is quite miraculous. Now, your second question is a big one, and I won't say much. We can come back to it. But I just finished writing a book about Franklin Roosevelt. So talking about how leaders in times of turmoil and deal with history and public events is something we might want to come back to. Happy to take your questions about FDR, but this is a period in the 30s and the 40s are a period when Americans were united in their pain in the Depression and united in their patriotism in the 40s. So it's a little bit of a different kind of scenario, but nonetheless, there are ways in which Roosevelt is also very effective in using history to help pull the country together, and we can talk about some of those as we go.
I'll jump in. Of course, if you ask a Civil War historian about leadership, one name comes to mind, and that's Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln, of course, thought very long and hard about the Declaration of Independence and its meaning. He put it at the center of his own politics and his own attempts to explain to the American public what the Civil War meant and should mean. Famously, in the Gettysburg Address, he evokes the Declaration of Independence. And Lincoln is essentially arguing that the nation was not, as secessionists claimed, a kind of compact between sovereign states that could be revoked if they felt the terms of the compact was being broken, that the nation was something older and more sacred than the Constitution even, that the nation was born of the American Revolution and the shared sacrifices of the American Revolution. Again, you see references to those sacrifices inscribed across this city with its wonderful Revolutionary War monuments and plaques and so on. So he argued for this organic understanding of the nation born of the Declaration. He embraces the Declaration's ideals, and it's really important to note, and this is a theme in FDR's life too, how he has been influenced to come to that conclusion. And he's influenced in no small manner by Black abolitionists who are the vanguard of the anti-slavery movement. And I mean people like Frederick Douglass, who had been saying for a long time, first of all, that the Declaration was a set of ideals to which we should aspire, who had for a long time called out the hypocrisy of Americans for not living up to those ideals. Abolitionists like Douglass were very focused not only on Southern slavery, but also on Northern racism. Racism was a Northern problem. Hypocrisy and complicity by Northerners in slavery. And men like Douglass were articulating a patriotism that was focused not on nostalgia, but a patriotism that was forward-looking. As one scholar has put it, the union they dreamed of was the unfulfilled union, the union that hadn't yet been created, but that might be created. And Lincoln is influenced by this body of thought. And so to connect Douglass and Lincoln, the history of Black abolitionism with Lincoln's own evolution as a leader, he doesn't start the Civil War as a man committed to emancipation. It's a long and in some respects halting journey. He's influenced by events on the ground, the mass flight of the enslaved from plantations and farms to Union lines. They're aiding the Union war effort, 200,000 African Americans fighting in the Union Army, nearly 80% of whom were Southerners. The Civil War was a war of the South versus the South on some profound level. Lincoln, catches up these themes, and we see them referenced in his own claim that the nation, the Union, the United States, is something transcendent, something mystical, the last best hope of earth, not simply a compact that can be broken. Now, on the theme of leadership, of course, I'm asked all the time, particularly as I've written a book about the end of the war, what would have happened if Lincoln hadn't been assassinated? We can't know, but we do know that Andrew Johnson, his successor, lacked Lincoln's talent for bringing people together and for urging them to aspire to the fulfillment of America's promise. He was a man, Johnson, who was deeply divisive, who was erratic, who was bitter, who abused his pardon power, who sowed division every chance he got. And it made a huge difference. He was a very important American president for all of the wrong reasons. So leadership matters, and that's why it matters that we study the presidency and that we understand the journeys of these presidents, and both the popular ones and the unpopular ones.
So there have been these moments when we felt that the republic was in great peril, sometimes from within and sometimes from without. And so let's talk about how the presidents or other leaders, not necessarily presidents, but certainly we can talk about them. I know, Will, you've been working on FDR, and he's deeply divisive in the 1930s. I mean, we think we forget that now, but the Republicans hated him, and he knew that, and he welcomed their hate, he said. But, of course, then the great crisis comes, and he's the first president elected to 3 terms and then 4. How does he draw upon this founding moment?
Thank you for asking about Roosevelt, who doesn't quite fit in with the centennial, but he does fit in with so many of these other themes of leadership and divisiveness. Roosevelt was hated passionately by at least a third of the electorate, and at times almost half of it. But there was a hardcore that really never reconciled themselves to Roosevelt. And here's the thing about Roosevelt: he actually made that into a political virtue. He was like, "That's perfect." Since he said, I welcome their hatred. I welcome their hatred because they're wrong, and I'm going to tell you why they're wrong. And he made a career of using this stubborn, opposition as essentially I won't say a straw man, but he did exploit the division in the country. But I think he did it in a constructive way, in the sense that he said, look, they oppose me because I want to improve our democracy. I want to make our democracy fairer. These are the guys who are in line with the oligarchs. And he used that word. Roosevelt used that word a lot. The oligarchs, the top-hatted rich folks, they're the ones who are trying to keep things unchanged. So he was a polarizing figure in many respects, but he also built a national coalition around the idea that there was a group of people who were resistant to change, and that's not unlike in earlier periods in which the aristocrats or the monarchists or the loyalists, they're the bad guys, and we're going to transform them into our common enemy. Roosevelt was exceptionally good at building, making people feel like they were part of a movement that was going to transform America. And the figure, this might surprise some of those of you who haven't read my book yet, but who haven't read anything about Roosevelt lately. But the figure that Roosevelt most looked to in the past, was somebody who he had a lot of influences. Alfred Thayer Mahan with his naval interests. He had worked at Woodrow Wilson in the First World War era. Many of these people could have been figures who influenced him, but the guy that he relied on most as president to give him historical legitimacy was Thomas Jefferson. And he did this constantly. He referred to Jefferson as America's first great teacher of democracy, and he gave a very important speech at the University of Virginia in 1940 about the enemies in the world who were out to destroy democracy. So he made democracy and Jefferson his theme, and the reason he liked Jefferson was, first of all, he was a Southerner, and Roosevelt was, as I'm sure many of you know, busily turning himself into a Southern Democrat because the Democratic Party's base was in the South, and he had to have good relations with his Southern friends, and he spent so much time in Warm Springs in order to do that, in order to make himself a Southern Democrat, as well as a Yankee patrician. This is Roosevelt's shape-shifting. But he borrowed Jefferson and turned him into an anti-oligarchical figure and a man of the people. And he said Jefferson is the figure who is most useful to him, but also a great symbol of our common dislike of the moneyed classes who keep on ripping off the working people. Now, all presidents borrow from the past, but he was pretty aggressive about borrowing this version of Jefferson. And, he also was responsible for the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., and he was present at the ribbon cutting. So Jefferson becomes a figure that he uses again and again as the the Hamiltonian school he's left behind, and it's going to be Jefferson is going to be our true American leader that I can invoke here in the 1930s. And I think this is just it's so interesting to think about how our leaders borrow from the past because they were so well educated in the past. Roosevelt was a deeply learned figure. He read history, he read naval and maritime history, but American political history. And I know this is true of many of our great presidents, but they felt themselves in the slipstream of history all the time. And I think when they're facing difficulties, that's when they're most worried that, in a sense, they're letting down the great tradition of American leadership. But it's also when they need a model to follow. How can I get out of this? How do I fight my way out of this problem that we're in? And they all know that it's a very small club of people they're in, and they look to their predecessors, sometimes the near ones, sometimes the distant ones, for guidance.
And I'll just add that we should focus too on female leaders and the role of women in exercising leadership roles, particularly in helping to steer America through moral crises. And one could mention so many examples, but I'll mention two. Ida Wells, the pioneering African-American journalist who at a time people refer to as a nadir in race relations, the Jim Crow era, the 1890s, a time of widespread anti-Black terrorism and lynching, risking her own life, exposed as lies, the swirling misinformation that tried to justify lynching, and she tried to set the record straight about its true causes as a tool of white supremacy. And she took that message abroad, again held up America's hypocrisy to the sort of light of reason and scrutiny, asked us to be aware of our reputation on the international stage. How can you claim to be the last best hope if these horrors take place under your watch? And again, the role of not just violence but propaganda, of misinformation in this era to spark and justify and gin up anti-Black violence it just can't be overstated. So that was a utterly fearless crusade on her part. Took many decades to result in real change. A second example is Clara Barton. I'm writing a biography of her now, the founder of the American Red Cross, Civil War nurse. And there too, Barton goes to work trying to found the American Red Cross in the 1880s, just as Reconstruction is coming to an end in the aftermath of this centennial celebration, at a time when, for all the reasons I described, people are really worried about the health and future of democracy. An age, the Gilded Age, famously, of not only of an increasing wealth gap, but also of rampant materialism, of a sense that the American spirit, American morality is being eroded, people looking for sources of moral regeneration. And what Barton tries to do with her founding of the American Red Cross is to celebrate compassion as a bond that might hold the nation together. It's a little known fact, but the Geneva Conventions, which sort of establishes the Red Cross, the international treaty developed to protect medical personnel and wounded soldiers in wartime, it's Clara Barton who has the idea that the Red Cross should be active also in times of natural disaster and calamity, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, epidemics, and so on. And so her MO with the Red Cross is to go to a site of disaster, the Sea Island hurricane, the Galveston hurricane, the Johnstown flood, and so on, bringing people relief and calling upon her fellow Americans by describing, evoking to them the scope of human suffering, touching the better angels of their nature, and getting them to open their pocketbooks and to help the victims of these disasters, and they do so. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of letters Clara Barton exchanges with people, thanking them for the 5 cents they sent or the $2 they sent, thousands of times over and over. And this, at a time of moral crisis, that message of compassion is a very important one. And we can't really overstate how important she was as a messenger.
And it's worth pointing out that all of these people, like her, like Ida Wells, Frederick Douglass, and people even up through the 1960s and 70s who pushed back and who questioned were viciously attacked. Maybe without social media and not the things we think of today, but from the highest places in American government, there was enormous pushback. These people are not patriotic, they're not American, etc. So one last quick, this is the lightning round before we turn it over to the audience. So quickly, we think we live in the most divisive time ever because we have social media, so we know what everybody on your street thinks about, and we know how they voted, and we know that that person's an idiot and that one's not at the grocery store. But the question is, as historians, are we any more divided today than we have been, going all the way back to the Federalist era or the era when Thomas Jefferson was president? Is it really different, or are we really experiencing something profoundly different?
I think it's different. I'm not quite sure I understand how to characterize those differences, but I'll do it not by talking about today, which you're welcome to ask questions about, but just back to 1976. I described a fractured nation, and I described the difficulties of putting together a celebratory events for 1976. But there were a couple of national events and things that Americans are generally proud about. The Op Sail event, Operation Sail, when they sailed the tall ships up the Hudson. There was a freedom train, went to all 48 contiguous states and took artifacts around the country. And this is going to sound silly, but I actually think it belongs in this narrative. How many of y'all remember Schoolhouse Rock? Okay, so the ones about we the people and the preamble and I'm only a bill, those were written for the bicentennial, and they are among the most enduring civics lessons that lots and lots of kids of a TV generation, when they only had 3 channels, would watch. And that was done by the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. That was a public production for public education, and it worked. Now, it's dated. You look at it now, and you understand immediately that this isn't how you would do it in 2026. But my point is simply this. The country was looking for ways to come together about certain things. And I'm not sure we are that country right now. I don't know that we are all looking to find that common thread, that common unity. We're stuck in our divisions, and we feel embattled perhaps, but I'm not sure what is the thing that is pulling us all together where we can leave the divisions behind and say, yeah, I share this with you. I always am going to share this with you. And these little ditties from, I'm only a bill, in a weird way becomes a kind of national theme. So that's the challenge right now. Find the thing that we genuinely share. We can genuinely be proud of sharing together. And until we do that, it's going to be a tough season.
I would just add that, part of the difficulty, I'll stress a continuity, sort of, sadly, that there's a playbook for dividing people, and it's a playbook that confuses them about causes and effects. So I'll give you an example. The abolitionists worked for decades, again, with black abolitionists in the vanguard, to argue that slavery was unproductive and unchristian and anti-democratic and divisive and needed to be dismantled. And anti-abolitionists in both the North and the South, white anti-abolitionists, said, "Oh, don't! You're stirring the pot. You're disrupting the compromises that keep our equilibrium in place. You're being divisive. Abolition is divisive. It's going to cause slave rebellion and race war, and it's going to alienate the North from the South." The abolitionists had to keep saying, in effect, it's not abolition that's divisive, it's slavery that's divisive. It's racism that's divisive. Don't be confused about the causes and effects here. And unfortunately, I think that we have in this culture, this is a theme throughout this entire, set of centuries we're covering, a way of discrediting change agents and reformers by saying you're the problem, rather than looking at the root causes of the problems. And that's an old playbook, and we still do it. And it makes it harder to find the things we share.
With that, we'll open it up to our audience. We've got some microphones, I do believe. There's Catherine. She's got one. If you would please raise your hand, and I please encourage you to ask a question. Don't make a statement. If you can please help it, we'll help you along towards your question if you do. There's one right in front of you, Catherine, right there.
Thank you so very much. This has been quite interesting and enlightening. My question is, do you think that the atmosphere that we're experiencing in the country today has been intentional, of this divisiveness? Do you think it has been intentional?
I mean, yes. It is, but it's the result of politics, and for a lot of reasons that we can all probably articulate. It's been a long time coming. The divisions are, as Liz has pointed out, we've always had divisions, but we found moments and ways to overcome them, even if only briefly. The divisions are there. I mean, American history is complicated. It's full of triumphs, and it's full of tragedies, and those things aren't going to go away. That's who we are. But if your politics only wants to exploit the pain and the fear, then I think you're missing the point of political leadership, which is to inspire, to create a sense of empathy, to ask yourselves, how does the other person feel? How can I make the other person feel more welcome? How can I lift up the other person? Then you're not really doing the work that I think we expect of our public servants. So I think it's purposeful. The division is purposeful because it's a political strategy. It's an old political strategy. I mean, I teach McCarthyism in my class, and students are often shocked by it because, of course, they're only 18. They'd never heard of Joe McCarthy. But the point is that divisive public figures have, as Liz just said, used a common playbook, and they know what they're doing. So we should be smarter than to fall for it, is all I'm saying. We've got a lot of common goodwill built up after a decade or so of contentious debate. I think we can do better.
Yeah, and I'll just add again, if you want to unite people, you have to be intentional about it and pivot intentionally. I'll just give one example, and I'll draw here on the work of the great scholar David Blight on Frederick Douglass. I mentioned his speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." Much of it is what we call a Jeremiad. He's talking about sort of moral decline and declension, a drift away from the ideals expressed by the founders. But he ends the speech on a somewhat more positive note by claiming the Constitution for the cause of freedom and human equality, by saying, if this document read in the right way shows us a path forward. It is an anti-slavery document. Constitution bitterly debated, pro-slavery and anti-slavery interpretations, but he doesn't scorn the Constitution. He says this can be read, should be read, in a way that will move us forward and help us overcome these divisions. So, ultimately leaders have to, you can't unite people if you're not trying to unite people.
Brianna also has a microphone here, and Catherine has one in the back, so please raise your hand. They'll come to you.
Hi, thank you so much for this really thoughtful conversation and for highlighting some of the outsider change agents that have always been with us. My question is about the lack of third parties as potential change agents or disrupting forces or maybe unifying forces. Can you talk a little bit about why that part of our structural political life has never really gelled?
Answer the question without mentioning the Electoral College.
I was going to say, do we have to get into the Electoral College? I mean, we do.
Yeah, I'll say a few words. Yeah, third parties have always struggled to get back to the abolitionists. They sort of lived this. They tried a couple times, anti-slavery Americans, to form a third party, the Liberty Party, the Free Soil Party, to do battle with the two titans of the era, the Whigs and the Democrats. Eventually, a new party comes on the scene, the Republican Party, Lincoln's Republican Party, dedicated to stopping the spread of slavery, the westward expansion of slavery. And it succeeds because it's able to build a big tent. That Republican Party is a coalition that can appeal to those sort of across the political spectrum who have qualms about slavery, whether they're economic qualms or political qualms or moral qualms and so on. So, there are examples of a new party entering the lists and succeeding. But part of the problem is parties represent entrenched interests. They represent patronage. They are vehicles for ambition. They become a kind of end in themselves. They're not part of that constitution, but they're sort of a fourth branch of government. That's what they've become. And partisanship, because it can equal, power and influence and wealth and all that, becomes a sort of end in itself. And that's been this is, the founders had doubts about parties. People like Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson made the case for them, saying it's good to have a healthy debate. But the two-party system, the power of those two parties and the various iterations of the two-party system has made it all too easy to marginalize those outside those party structures.
I spent a fall in Germany, and try explaining the Electoral College, the Supreme Court, and the Senate and its various rules to a foreigner, and then you'll realize, I don't know why we came up with it. Well, I do know why, but it is a very, very peculiar architecture, obviously an 18th century scheme, not well adapted to the 21st century, but it's the one we've got. Third parties is tempting, as if that's going to solve the issue, though it might just subdivide us even further. Liz used the important word here, which is coalition. If you want to guide and lead and change America, you have to build a coalition, and you have to know how to build a coalition. People will say, well, did Donald Trump do that? Didn't he just play to a base? No, look at the votes. Look where his votes came from in the last election. He had a national coalition. Now, it may not have been a political coalition of the kind that Franklin Roosevelt built. I don't think it was. And I don't think it's strong enough to transform the country, though it may yet. But look at what Roosevelt accomplished. I mean, he pulled in people from the North, from the South. He pulled in African Americans eventually, though they were still skeptical about the Democratic Party. He pulled in white segregationists. You could not have had the New Deal without the white segregation in the South, of course. I mean, and Roosevelt knew that perfectly well. He didn't like it, but he understood that if he was going to initiate the transformative legislation that he brought about, for which generations of Americans have been thankful, he was going to have to hold his nose and work with segregationists across the South, because that was the core of his party. And he did, and it changed the country. So politics ain't perfect. You've got to find people you can work with who you don't agree with all the time. And we're forgetting how to do that in the worst way these days.
We have time for one more question, and Catherine, if you want to pick somebody, and I want to say while we're doing that our guests are going to be signing books afterwards. One's going to be over there, and one's going to be over here. So I invite you to come up and talk to them and meet them, buy a book, and have them sign it. Okay.
Hello, my name is Jaylee Kilgo. I'm a senior at Georgia Southern, majoring in history, so I want to say thank y'all so much for coming. But my question for you is, y'all have interpreted a lot of the different, like bicentennial, other celebrations for America's birthday. 50 to 100 years down the road, how do you think that historians will interpret the America's 250th celebration?
We left the hard one for last. That's a history major question. That's a very, very good question. How will future generations look at what we're doing today and how we are celebrating it? It's really a question, I think, for our hosts, Georgia Historical Society, in a sense, to answer, because so much of what is going to be good about the 250th celebrations is being done at the state level by historical commissions and in your local community. And a lot of good work is being done by them. And not just for this 1 year, but on multiple years. They have a wonderful 4-year program organized around key themes of American government. So look to your state historical society is what I would say first. But the second thing is, I'm going to say a negative thing, and I'm going to end with a positive thing. we're missing the boat. We're missing an opportunity. At the federal level, the 250th anniversary has been, I think, unduly politicized. But it's a shame because the opportunity to bring Americans to history, whatever their views about the past, bring them to engagement with the history. That's what anniversaries offer you. That's what these celebrations are about. It's like a moment of pausing and saying, let's take stock. Let's look at this extraordinary country, this extraordinary experiment. And that's just not happening. It's not happening. However, here's my positive thing I'll end on. And I just want to take you all to take a moment and look at what we're doing here. I mean, this right here is an extraordinary event. It's an extraordinary coming together of people to talk about the past and our place in that past. And this is happening in thousands and thousands of communities across the country. It's been happening for years. Americans love talking about history. We're a passionately engaged population. We're a learned population. And so we've just got to keep doing this, and eventually, we'll get there. But we've got to keep thinking and talking to each other as we're doing tonight. I really just want to thank you for coming and making this happen.
It is a great question. A history major question. We appreciate it, really thoughtful. And, I'll just add, building on what Will said, that, if the historians look back and what they see is hollow self-congratulation and fantasies of unity and, sort of an exclusive view that pushes out some people to build others up, they will scorn it. If they look back and they see good faith efforts to be rigorous, inclusive history is more rigorous than exclusive history. If they look back and they see, their focus on Ken Burns' wonderful American Revolution documentary. Don't know if you've watched it, but wow, right? I mean, it's a story that's multifaceted, and it means more people can relate to it and more people can draw lessons from it and find sources of inspiration in it. If they look back at efforts that are being made on the state level to make points such as the following, the Declaration of Independence has inspired independence movements in hundreds of places around the world. Think in global terms about what our revolution and what our ideals have meant to the world. If we do that, then maybe people will look back and say, this was an opportunity met and welcomed, not lost.
Well done. Thank you both.
We will talk to you if you don't buy a book, but you can do that if you like.